Before the last color in the sky is fully gone, the lane already feels darker than the field beyond it. Evening does not arrive here as a single change. It gathers slowly in the stones, the seams of the wall, and the narrowing road where the air loses its heat. The dye room waits at the end of that lane, with the same unhurried patience. Its outer shape is plain enough to be mistaken for any working room from a distance. Yet the longer the eye rests on it, the more its purpose becomes clear. There's a low roof line, a doorway set deep in the wall, and a small pool of amber light near the threshold where dusk settles. The place does not announce itself. That feels right. Places like this are not built to be noticed by strangers or remembered for their beauty alone. They are built to hold a process, to protect a habit, to keep color from becoming waste. Even before the door opens, the walls suggest that something gentle has been happening inside for a long time. The stone looks cooled by the day. The wood around the frame has darkened with use. The air just outside the door carries a faint mineral dampness, as though the room has been breathing in a quieter register than the lane. At this hour, the world outside has softened its own edges. Roof tiles have gone gray-blue in the falling light. A shutter somewhere farther down the lane has already been closed. The path between houses no longer belongs to errands and voices. It belongs to late stillness and small noises that seem larger because the world has stepped back. In that softened air, the low chamber feels less like a workshop than a vessel, a place where color is contained before it is allowed to rest elsewhere. The first impression is not of brilliant pigment. It is of restraint. Warmth gathers near the doorway, but the place is made mostly of shadow, lamp glow, and the dull sheen of worked surfaces. A wooden beam carries the memory of cloth. The sill has been rubbed smooth where hands have passed with wet buckets or folded bundles. The threshold itself is worn into a shallow curve from repeated use. Nothing here is accidental. Every mark answers a purpose that has been repeated often enough to become part of the building. What makes the place calm is not emptiness. It is readiness. The vats are already in their places. The cloth rails wait with lengths of fabric hanging in quiet folds. The water jars sit where they can be reached without searching. A small bench near the wall holds stirring tools, folded rags, and a shallow bowl with a dark ring of dye at the bottom. The space is arranged to make motion easy, but the motion itself is never hurried. A room that works with color knows that color will only settle if the pace stays respectful. So the opening holds on the threshold a little longer. The dusk outside and the low-lit chamber inside share the frame for a moment, each lending the other meaning. The place does not resist time. It guides it. It gathers fabric, water, wood, and pigment into a rhythm that keeps the night from feeling hurried. Inside, the air is warmer than the lane but not hot. It has the dense, damp heaviness of a place where water has recently been lifted, poured, and stirred. The scent is earthy rather than sharp, full of soaked fiber, old wood, mineral water, and the faint sweetness that some dyes keep even after they have been mixed and quieted. The first breath within the chamber feels held as if the air itself has learned the discipline of the work. It carries enough moisture to support the cloth, but not so much that it becomes restless. The lanterns hang low and steady. Their light is not bright enough to flatten anything, which is important. Color in this room should never be forced into glare. Shadow gives the pigments room to breathe. Amber light gathers in the curve of a vat and softens on the lip of a jar. The darker corners remain dark by design, so the workroom can hold contrast without strain. Near the ceiling, beam shadows lie across one another like folded cloth, while the lower half of the room remains full of practical surfaces that can be reached, measured, and cleaned. A row of vats stands near the center of the space, each one with its own quiet weight. The vessels are not decorative. They are broad, firm, and dependable, built to keep liquid steady while cloth changes beneath it. Some hold a deep indigo haze that looks almost black until the lantern catches the surface. Others carry a softened madder tone, a brown-red depth that seems to rest rather than shine. A third may hold a yellow bath whose color is so muted it appears to be made of evening itself. None of these tones shout. Each one waits with the composure of a substance that knows it will be handled carefully. Wood appears everywhere, but never in a way that feels crowded. Stirrers lie across a table with the ends darkened from repeated immersion. Cloth rails stretch along the wall and across the room, their surfaces marked by loops, pegs, and places where wet fabric has hung and dried in stages. A ladder-back stool sits near a workbench where folded lengths of cloth rest in pale, damp stacks. The workroom seems to understand that wood is useful because it can be touched, lifted, replaced, and trusted. It carries the modest intelligence of a tool that has been repaired rather than replaced. Water is the quiet partner to everything else. It sits in jars, troughs, bowls, and hidden places behind the room's strongest shapes. It changes the dye from powder to bath, from bath to cloth, from cloth to something that can be lifted and left to settle. The surfaces know where moisture belongs and where it should not linger. Stone accepts spills without complaint. Wood remains slightly thirsty at the edges, taking up what it needs and giving the rest back to the air. Cloth accepts color, but only after it has been prepared to hold it. What makes the place so restful is the balance between effort and waiting. Dyeing is a process of careful intervention, but it is also a process of delay. Cloth cannot be rushed to the color it will become. The bath must be right. The soak must be even. The lift must be steady. The hanging must allow the fabric to draw itself toward its final tone. The workroom respects that slowness. It makes waiting visible and useful. In that way, the dye room becomes a place where time is not lost. Time is used. The room has the kind of calm that comes only from repeated practice. A worker learns which cloth needs more patience, and which bath needs another stir, which corner feels cooler, which wall keeps a better hold on evening air, which peg supports a heavier length without bending, and which little sound means the dye has begun to settle. None of that happens by accident. It comes from spending enough evenings in the same space to recognize its habits. The vats carry the center of the dye room's meaning. They are where raw material becomes something more deliberate, but the change is never dramatic. It is gradual, folded into stillness. A cloth lowered into a vat does not emerge transformed all at once. It darkens first at the edges, then more fully across the weave, then settles into its own version of depth. That slow deepening is one of the room's small miracles. Color appears by degrees, and the room never pretends otherwise. Each vat has a slightly different character. One bath may be stirred less often, and kept for a shade that must stay soft. Another may be watched with more attention because the cloth within it is especially fine, or because the color needs to hold to a particular level of dusk, rich darkness. The vessels are arranged so that the worker can move in a circuit without drama. Step to the left, lift the lid, test the warmth, stir once or twice, return the lid, and let the bath continue doing its quiet work. The pattern is simple, but the simplicity is earned. Cloth is the reason the dye room exists, and cloth is also its most patient subject. Fabric enters here plain and leaves with memory gathered into it. Some lengths are coarse and meant for ordinary use. Others are finer, with a tighter weave that takes color more evenly and holds it with a soft glow. Still others have already been washed and prepared, then returned to the room to await another bath or another correction in tone. The rails are crowded only in the sense that they are used. That kind of fullness feels restful, not crowded, because each hanging length belongs exactly where it is. The wooden rails have a craft of their own. Pegs are set at intervals that make sense for the room's reach. Crossbars are spaced to allow air to move freely around the wet fabric. The grain of the wood runs faintly, under a skin of use, and where cloth has brushed it often, the surface has been polished into a low sheen. The rails are not beautiful because they are delicate. They are beautiful because they are reliable. They hold wet weight without complaint and allow color to dry without breaking the cloth's shape. Water, meanwhile, is never still for long, but it is never chaotic either. A jar is lifted, tilted, and poured with a careful arc. A basin is tipped to remove sediment before the next rinse. A cloth is dipped, squeezed lightly, and returned to the bath. The floor around the work area is stone, so the room can accept these small spills without becoming troubled by them. Dark dampness appears, and then slowly fades. That fading is part of the room's rhythm. Moisture is allowed to pass through work, and then quiet down again. The relationship between these materials gives the room its steady voice. Vats hold the color. Cloth receives it. Wood supports the movement between them. Water keeps the whole process alive. None of the materials tries to dominate the others. That is why the room feels so settled. It is not a place of display. It is a place of cooperation. Color emerges from that cooperation as naturally as dusk deepens on the lane outside. Color in this room is not a spectacle. It is a decision made one small step at a time. A worker does not ask the cloth to become vivid. The workroom asks the cloth to become faithful to its own intended tone. That is a very different kind of ambition. Some fabrics need only a washed whisper of color, enough to shift them from plainness to depth without losing their softness. Others need a stronger stain that will hold against wear, light, and time. The room remembers how each shade should feel before it is fully seen. The quiet work begins with attention to temperature. A bath too warm may be too eager, taking up dye in a way that looks bold at first and uneven later. A bath too cool may not yield a color that gathers smoothly. The room has no interest in haste. It favors the measured stretch of minutes that let the liquid settle into the weave. The hand that tends the vat keeps the stirring gentle. The cloth is lifted only enough to check the depth of tone, then return to the bath if the color needs more time. This is the kind of work that trains patience without teaching boredom. A watched cloth is never static. It darkens in tiny stages. It releases threads of dye with each lift and return. The surface of the vat changes as pigment moves through it. The rails collect drips that later become faint stains on the stone below. Everything remains active, yet soft enough to feel like breathing. Nothing must burst forward. Everything can arrive gently. A shade may be checked against a hanging sample nearby. The room keeps these comparisons close. A hanging sample near the wall can serve as the reference. Not because the room lacks confidence, but because subtle differences matter. A blue that leans too far into dusk can turn somber. A red that loses depth can become flat. A brown that takes too much gray may feel dull rather than grounded. Small variations are what make the work human. The space values those tiny distinctions because they shape how the cloth will live in daylight later. The color itself has a language, but it is a language of understatement. Indigo gives a feeling of water after sunset. Madder suggests old brick, root, dried skin of fruit, and the warmth left in stone after the sun is gone. Yellows here do not sparkle like metal. They settle like dried grass or soft candle smoke. The room is not interested in brilliance for its own sake. It asks each tone to belong to the cloth and to the time of day that suits it. Dusk is the right time for such tones because dusk already knows how to soften edges. As the room continues its work, one begins to notice that color changes the room as much as the room changes color. Amber light becomes deeper when reflected by wet cloth. The dark surfaces around the vat seem to absorb pigment from the air itself. A stack of folded fabric, near the wall, carries the impression of waiting even before it is touched. In this way, the workroom is never just the background for dyeing. It participates in the outcome. The best rooms show their work without trying to hide it. And this room is full of small, honest signs of use. A dark ring around a jar marks where liquid has been set down many times. A line of tiny flecks on a rail shows where wet cloth has brushed the same place again and again. The bench top bears a patch of old color rubbed into the grain, not enough to look careless, just enough to prove that the work has lived here for a long time. Even the floor has learned to wear its stains with dignity. Ordinary hands belong to the dye room more than any tool does. They tie, lift, rinse, test, squeeze, and fold. They know how to keep the fabric from twisting. They know how to support a heavy length so that the weight does not pull the weave out of shape. They know how to find the right amount of pressure when a cloth needs to be wrung but not strained. These skills are quiet and repetitive, yet they are also full of judgment. A good hand in a dye room is a hand that can tell when enough is enough. Some movements are so ordinary that they disappear unless one looks closely. A finger wipes a droplet from the rim of a vat. A wrist steadies a cloth, while the other hand smooths out a fold. A towel catches a spill before it reaches the wrong edge of the floor. A wooden stirrer is set down in the exact place where it will not roll. These are not dramatic acts, but they keep the room functioning. They also keep the mood gentle. No one here is trying to prove mastery. The place asks for care, and care is what the hands provide. The stains that remain are not mistakes. They are records. A pale ghost of color on the corner of a table tells of a repeated motion. A deep stain at the base of a vat shows the path of drips and rinses over many evenings. A cloth that has once been left in a bath too long may hold a slightly darker edge, and the room will remember that decision as a lesson rather than a failure. Rooms like this collect knowledge through contact. They do not keep notebooks. They keep traces. What matters most is the way those traces never become disorder. The space holds use without becoming messy in spirit. A stain lands and is acknowledged. A drip dries and becomes part of the surface. The work continues. That continuity gives the space its calm strength. It allows the room to remain modest while still being deeply experienced. The walls do not need to be new. The rail does not need to be clean in a theatrical sense. It only needs to remain trustworthy. As the sky outside leans farther into night, the doorway grows more distinct. The amber lantern near the frame gives up some of its authority to the cooler dark beyond, but it does not disappear. Instead, it settles into a softer roll, a small steadiness that helps the threshold remain legible. The door is partly open now, enough to let the room breathe, enough to let the lane remind the workers that evening has not finished arriving. The boundary matters. It keeps the dye room from becoming sealed off from time. At the doorway, one can sense the meeting of two climates. Inside, warmth and dampness support the dye. Outside, the air has sharpened and begun to cool, carrying the scent of stone, dust, and the faint, clean edge that evenings often bring. The threshold does not argue with either side. It lets both exist in the same breath. The space knows how to stand between conditions without breaking its own calm. The edge of the doorframe has been touched often enough to shine where the wood grain has worn smooth. The latch sits heavy, but quiet. The hinge keeps its own sound close, never squealing, only settling with a low, familiar movement when the door shifts. These details make the place feel lived in without crowding it with figures. The doorway tells its own story through touch marks and the balance between opening and closing. Evening deepens across the lane, and the chamber answers by becoming slightly more intimate. Not smaller, exactly, but more inward. The hanging cloths red as deeper folds. The vats become darker surfaces with faint lit edges. The rails recede into layered shadow. The chamber remains comfortable and dark. It can work inside it because it already knows where every object belongs. By now, dusk has become a full evening. The room feels complete in that hour. The lantern light is richer against the dark wood. The stone floor appears almost black in the corners, though it remains dry where it needs to be. The cloth rails hold shadows between the folds. The vats rest like deep pools with their surfaces no longer entirely visible. This is the hour when the workroom can look almost contemplative, as if it has stepped back from its labor. The answer is simple. It has been helping color arrive gently. The dye room also keeps a quiet record, though not one that speaks in stories. It remembers the softness of a cloth after its second rinse. It remembers how a vat smelled when the mixture was stirred just before dusk. It remembers the angle of light on a hanging length after the room was opened, a little too early, and then corrected with a calm hand. These memories live in the surfaces, in the fiber, in the sequence of motions repeated over and over. The chamber has no need to announce them. It holds them quietly and goes on working. The memory of color is especially subtle. A dyed cloth may carry the proof of its bath in ways that are not obvious at first glance. A dark blue can still hold a little of the water that formed it. The room understands that color is not only what the eye sees in one moment. It is also what the fabric will remember after it leaves the room. That is why the room matters to the wider household. It protects more than pigments. It protects consistency. It helps keep a chosen tone from slipping into something accidental. It allows fabric to carry a mood forward without making a fuss about it. The dyed cloth may later become clothing, a wrap, a lining, or a covering for something precious, but the room already knows that its work will continue beyond the doorway. The memory it leaves behind is practical and durable. There is comfort in knowing what happens here will outlast the moment. The cloth will dry. The vat will cool. The floor will be wiped. The rails will stand ready for the next length. It keeps going because the work is never fully done, only completed in stages. That fact does not make it restless. It makes it reliable. It is a place that can receive another task without losing the order of the last one. Such steadiness is a quiet gift. And because the room keeps memory in such a patient way, it also keeps silence. The silence is not empty. It is full of results. It holds the dyes settling, the waters retreat, the cloth slow darkening, and the hand's careful restraint. The evening does not erase those things. It gathers them. The place can hold the day in softened form, leaving a calm surface instead of a loud impression. That is how the room remembers best. By the time the last useful motion has been made, the room already knows how to rest. The vats are covered. The rails hold their cloth in long settled shapes. The tools are laid down where they can be found again without searching. A damp cloth is folded over a table edge to dry. The floor has been wiped at the most active places, leaving behind only the darkened memory of water where it once ran. The room does not need to be made new. It only needs to be left in a state that respects its next hour. The lantern near the doorway gives one final warm emphasis to wood and stone before the darkness outside takes more of the frame. Its light rests on the rim of a vat and on a small stain on the bench. Those details are enough. The room does not require a brighter ending. A stronger glow would only pull it away from its own nature. The gentle light is better. It allows the room to remain itself as evening becomes night. The last sounds are small. A lid lowered, a cloth shifted, a peg tapped once, a latch nudged into place. None of them is final in a dramatic sense. They simply complete the pattern of the room. After each sound, the stillness returns a little deeper than before. The doorway remains open just long enough to let the cooler air move through once more, and then it too quiets. The place settles into the certainty that its work has been completed for now. That steadiness is what remains most strongly at the end. Not the vats, though they matter. Not the rails, though they are useful. Not the lantern, though it gives the room its evening shape. What remains is the sense that this place knows how to hold color without noise, let work settle into fabric, and let dusk become part of its quiet character. The room does not finish with triumph. It finishes with composure. When the final look passes across the threshold, the dye room seems to return to its own breathing. It waits in the dark with the calm assurance that tomorrow's work will begin where tonight's work left off. Nothing is lost. Nothing is rushed. Color has been guided into cloth, and cloth has been allowed to remember. The room keeps that memory in stone, wood, water, and shadow, while the lane outside grows still enough for sleep. That is the lasting shape of the dye room at dusk, a place where color is patient, where fabric receives more than pigment, where ordinary hands can bring order to a slow and careful process, and where evening deepens without unsettling the work already done. The dye room holds its own quiet, and holding it offers a small kind of peace.